A rich farmer didn't know he had a child until he saw triplet girls sleeping in his barn. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The sun had barely begun to crest over the horizon when Richard Hargrove made his way to the barn. It was his routine for decades, even after amassing his fortune with elite cattle and soybeans. The farmhands were just waking up, but this section of the property, tucked behind the old barn, was always his responsibility. Animals sense when the owner's absent, his father used to say, and Richard took that wisdom to heart. But on this humid morning, something felt off. The silence was dense, as if time itself had paused. The pigs weren't grunting as usual. They stood motionless, agitated, sensing something Richard hadn't yet perceived. That's when he saw them. 3 small figures lying on a pile of hay in the driest corner of the pen. 3 blonde girls with identical dusty blue dresses, sleeping, side by side, embracing as if the entire world had disappeared around them. Their faces were smudged with dirt, but there was a disturbing serenity in the scene. They weren't crying, weren't moving, just sleeping on the bare ground surrounded by pigs and hay. Richard froze for a moment, thinking he might be hallucinating. He blinked, rubbed his sweaty forehead, and approached slowly, his heart racing like in his rodeo days. "What? What is this?" he murmured to himself. No sound, no living soul nearby except for the animals. He moved closer. The girls were blonde, with tangled hair, fair skin, bare feet, and small frames. They looked to be about 3 or 4 years old. One wore a strange necklace with red beads, but there was no backpack, diaper, paper, or sign of any adult. Nothing. Richard felt his stomach turn. He knelt and placed his hand on one child's shoulder, touching her with the care one might use handling a relic. "Sweetie, are you okay?" The girl opened her eyes slowly, looked at him as if she recognized him but said nothing. The other 2 continued sleeping without any reaction. That's when something more unsettling happened. In the background, between the cracks of the old barn, the farmer saw fresh footprints in the soil, moistened by the previous night's rain. Small footsteps and larger ones that came to this spot but didn't lead away. He jumped up and shouted, "James, get over here now." The foreman appeared running, not understanding his boss's desperation. Richard pointed to the pen without being able to say anything. James's eyes widened at the sight of the children. But what in heaven's name? The silence was broken only by the sound of a pig sneezing. The world at that moment seemed to have stopped. Richard knew that morning would mark his life forever, but he had no idea how much. The great farmhouse that usually smelled of freshly brewed coffee and baked bread early in the morning awoke that day with the scent of uncertainty. Richard sat at the dining table, still stunned by what had happened in the pig pen. The 3 little girls, now clean and wrapped in blankets, slept in the old guest room, closely watched by Mrs. Peterson, the housekeeper who had managed the farm for over 20 years. "This isn't normal, Mr. Hargrove," she said, serving him a cup of chamomile tea. "Children don't just appear out of nowhere, and 3 identical ones at that. It's like something from a movie." Richard didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on a random spot on the wall. What disturbed him most wasn't just the children's appearance, but that uncomfortable sensation invading his chest. A kind of intuition he hadn't felt since Caroline's death. His daughter had disappeared 4 years ago and was presumed dead after a tragic car accident. At least that's what they told him. He picked up the phone and called Sheriff Donovan, an old acquaintance, a discreet and serious man. He quickly explained the situation. "3 little girls in the pig pen?" Donovan repeated, confused. "Has anyone threatened you? Did you see any car or clue?" "Nothing except the footprints. Keep the children there. I'll send the social worker, along with a patrol car, but keep this quiet, understand? Let's do this right." Richard hung up and took a deep breath. God help me. Hours later, the social worker arrived. Her name was Laura, a practical, young, and confident woman. She assessed the situation, spoke with Richard, and examined the girls, who were now awake but spoke nothing beyond whispers among themselves in a confusing, almost invented language. They're not malnourished, Laura commented. But they've been cold and frightened. They're dirty, yes, but there's care here. Someone protected them until leaving them here. Richard observed in silence, feeling a lump in his throat every time he looked at the girls. It was as if fate was playing a trick on him. Their eyes. There was something there that hurt and called to him. Will they be taken to a shelter? He asked, trying to appear calm. Laura hesitated. Ideally, yes, but today is Saturday. The shelters are full, and the town is celebrating the annual fair. I have authorization to leave them in your temporary custody until Monday, but with supervision. Richard nodded. They can stay here, it's safe. Laura looked around the farm, analyzed everything, and finally seemed satisfied. She filled out a document, handed a copy to Richard, and said goodbye, promising to return in 2 days. That night, while the farm slept, Richard sat alone on the porch, watching the starry sky. "Who are you?" he murmured, with his coffee cup growing cold in his hands. "And why is my heart telling me I already know these girls?" In the bedroom, the three slept again. One of them clutched tightly to a necklace of red beads that Richard would later recognize as the same one he had given to his daughter on her 15th birthday. The day dawned with a thick fog covering the farm, as if the world was about to reveal an ancient secret. Richard woke early, but this time he didn't go to check on the pigs or supervise the workers. He went straight to the girls' room. There they were, still sleeping, lying side by side on the old wooden bed. The room smelled of children's soap and lavender. Mrs. Peterson had insisted on making everything clean, as if these children were her own grandchildren. Richard approached slowly. His eyes settled on the detail that had disturbed him the previous night. The necklace. It was made of red beads on a thick leather cord with a small silver medallion engraved with a butterfly. He knew that necklace. He had commissioned it himself. He remembered perfectly the day he gave it to his daughter Caroline on her 15th birthday. She loved butterflies. It was a symbol between them, an inside joke. When Caroline's mother died while she was still a child, Richard invented a story to comfort her. He told her that butterflies were messengers from heaven, and each time one landed near her, it was her mother sending a kiss. She believed it for many years, perhaps until the end. Richard sat on the edge of the bed, trying not to wake the girl wearing the necklace. She was lying on her side, fingers entwined around the pendant. He felt the urge to cry, but swallowed the lump in his throat. "If this necklace is Caroline's, then these girls," he whispered. "But it's impossible." It was impossible, because Caroline was dead. Her body hadn't been found, but the rescue team confirmed her car had fallen down a deep ravine, and compatible blood and tissue remnants had been found. They said the river's current could have carried the body away. He had cried for months, cried like never before, buried a symbolic urn, had a small mausoleum built in the town cemetery. The pain was unbearable. And now, this. Richard rose, trembling, and went to his office. He opened a locked drawer, took out an old velvet box, and pulled from inside a photo yellowed by time. Caroline at 15, smiling next to a cake, wearing the necklace. It was the same one. Doubt began to turn into a scream inside him. If these girls were Caroline's daughters, where was she? Later, while walking around the farm, Richard noticed the footprints in the pen were almost erased but still visible in some patches of mud. He followed them carefully, trying to map the path. The marks went to a side fence where the vegetation was denser, and then disappeared on the dirt road. He called James, the foreman, and pointed to the marks. "Can you pull the security camera footage from the back gate entrance?" James scratched his head. "I don't think it'll help, boss. The rain from 2 nights ago burned out the circuit. The wiring got soaked. That camera's footage is gone." Richard frowned. It was too much of a coincidence. Returning to the house, one of the girls ran to him in the yard. She was laughing. The laughter was crystalline, light, innocent. Richard smiled, but felt a strange pang in his chest. That laugh was identical to his daughter's when she was a child. And there, in the middle of the farm courtyard, the farmer began to wonder if fate was trying to tell him something he had refused to hear for years. Richard spent the rest of the morning sitting on the porch, watching the girls play in the packed dirt yard. They had woken up in good spirits, fed with warm milk and bread with butter made by Mrs. Peterson, and now they were chasing a chicken that desperately tried to escape. Their laughter echoed across the yard. It was a common scene in a house full of children, but on this farm it seemed like a miracle. James, the foreman, sat beside his boss with a glass of iced tea in his hands. "Do you really think they're related?" "To you?" he asked carefully. Richard didn't respond immediately. His gaze was lost in the distance. "I don't know, James, but there's something here I can't explain. That laugh, the necklace, the way one of them looked at me this morning. It's like she recognized my soul. And if they really are Miss Caroline's daughters..." Richard sighed deeply. Then everything changes. In the early afternoon, Laura, the social worker, returned to the farm. She arrived accompanied by Dr. Eloise, a psychologist from the township specializing in childhood trauma. Both spent a good amount of time observing the girls, trying to talk to them, using toys, asking their names. Nothing. The three remained in absolute silence whenever someone new approached. Only among themselves did they speak, and even then in a confusing manner. It was as if they had created their own language, as twins sometimes do, or as if they had learned to stay silent to survive. "They don't trust adults," said Eloise, writing in her notebook. "But they're emotionally connected to each other. That's good. It shows they've protected one another." Laura nodded. "We need to discover who they are. We've notified the protection agencies and the children's precinct, but nobody has reported missing children with this profile. No documents, no records. It's like they've been erased from the map." Richard remained silent. "Can I continue with temporary guardianship?" he finally asked. Laura and Eloise exchanged glances. "You can, Mr. Hargrove, for now. They're fine here, but if anything changes, anything at all, you let us know immediately." "Of course." As the two women were getting into their car, one of the girls, the one wearing the necklace, ran to Richard, grabbed his hand tightly, and said for the first time a single word: "Butterfly." He froze. Laura and Eloise didn't hear. They were starting the car radio. But Richard, he felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. That word was the secret symbol between him and Caroline. The certainty began to take shape in the old farmer's heart. If these girls weren't just his missing daughter's children, then someone had hidden them, and the reason for that might be even darker than he imagined. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table with an old notebook in his hands where Caroline used to scribble poetry and paste stickers when she was a child. For some reason, he had kept it all these years, never having the courage to throw it away. He flipped slowly until he found a page where his daughter, at 11 years old, had drawn a blue butterfly with the phrase, "If I disappear one day, look where the butterflies hide." It was a child's fancy, but now it sounded like a message, a sign. Richard felt he was getting closer and closer to a buried truth. The next day, Richard asked James to help him search the surroundings of the farm for any trace of who might have left the girls there. They went to the creek, then to the abandoned sheds, followed the dirt road that gave access to the old train tracks. Nothing, no footprints, no forgotten objects, no recent signs. But as they passed near the old back fence where the tall grass grew, Richard spotted something strange, a red ribbon tied to one of the wires, almost invisible. He stopped. "This ribbon wasn't here before," he murmured. James untied it carefully. It was satin, dirty but still smelling of cheap perfume, and had been intentionally tied as if it were a mark, a reference for someone to return later. "Starting to look like a message," commented James. "Like a code from someone moving around these parts in hiding." Richard took the ribbon with him, tucked it in his wallet. Later he sat on the porch while the girls napped after lunch. Suddenly, a memory invaded his mind. Almost 5 years ago, Caroline had appeared in town pregnant. She said the children's father had disappeared. She was frightened, insecure, but determined to raise her children alone. Richard had tried to help, but they'd argued bitterly. It was the last time they spoke before the accident, or at least before the story of the accident. He now doubted everything. If Caroline had been pregnant with triplets and if these girls were the estimated age. The farmer stood up and went to the children's room. He entered quietly, making no noise. In the corner of the dresser was a small pink backpack, probably brought with them that nobody had noticed. He opened it carefully. Inside, among some clothes and a torn diaper, was a folded paper. It was a note. Richard's hands trembled as he unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakable. "Dad, if this ever reaches you, please take care of them. I couldn't hide anymore. I had to run. Forgive me. Caroline." The world collapsed in silence. He sat on the edge of the bed with the note on his knees, eyes full of tears, feeling that his daughter was still alive and that for some reason, someone was preventing her from returning. And now, with the triplets in his house, the danger might be closer than he had imagined. The note burned Richard's hands as if it had been written with fire. His daughter's handwriting was clear, and each word carried a scream trapped in time. She was alive, and more than that, she had fled from something or someone who forced her to hide, leaving behind daughters he never knew existed. With a heavy heart, Richard went to his office and locked the door. He scanned the note and stored the original inside an old candy tin at the bottom of the drawer where he kept important documents. This needed to be preserved. That night, he summoned James for a more serious conversation. "Answer me frankly. Have you seen anything strange in the last few days? Strangers on the road, cars parked near the fence?" James scratched his beard and thought for a moment. "Now that you mention it, about 4 or 5 days ago, I saw a black car parked on the other side of the road fence near that bamboo grove. It was at night. I only saw it because I went to the water tank and the streetlight reflected off the bodywork. I thought it was a fisherman, people who stopped to rest, but what? The car had tinted windows, and when I tried to approach, it drove off, tires squealing. I thought it was strange, but since nobody entered the farm, I let it go." Richard fell silent. The weather was turning again, distant lightning cutting the sky, announcing another storm. "What kind of car was it?" "Sedan, a bit old. I think it was a black Vectra. No front license plate." That night Richard stayed awake, the sound of rain beating on the roof, the smell of wet earth rising from the plantations, and that anguish. Something was happening. Something that involved his daughter, these 3 girls, and someone who might be watching from a distance. The next day, without telling anyone, he went to town, stopped at the sheriff's office and asked to speak with Donovan. "I want to open a private investigation. I need to know if a black car without plates circulated around the area last week, and I need access to any camera footage, gas station records, or reports about missing people, including my daughter, Caroline Hargrove." His voice was firm. Donovan scratched his head. "Richard, it's been years. What are you looking for?" Richard pulled from his pocket a copy of the note. "Evidence, and this is the first. She didn't die. She escaped and left her daughters here with me." The sheriff read the note twice. His expression changed. "I'll see what I can do, but if this is true, you've gotten yourself into something much bigger than you imagine." Richard left the sheriff's office with the sensation that a new chapter had begun. What he didn't know was that that same morning, someone was observing the farm from the top of a nearby hill, with binoculars and a radio in hand. From the top of the hill, camouflaged among dry trees and moss-covered rocks, a man watched the Hargrove farm with cold eyes. He had an unkempt beard, a black jacket, and a dark cap that covered part of his face. In one hand he held binoculars, in the other a radio with an open frequency. He spoke little, almost whispering, like someone reporting military movements. "The girls are still in the house. The old man hasn't turned them in. I repeat, he hasn't turned them in." From the other side of the line, a metallic, impatient voice responded, "Observe only, no action for now." The man gritted his teeth but obeyed. He turned his eyes back to the big farmhouse where the girls played innocently in the garden under Mrs. Peterson's care. They were safe. For now. In town, Richard ate silently at the restaurant on the corner near the sheriff's office. He couldn't think about food. His head was buzzing with doubts, possibilities, and memories of the past that he swore had been buried. The memory of his daughter's accident returned forcefully. He wondered, what if everything had been staged? While pushing rice around his plate, his cell phone rang. "Mr. Hargrove, this is the private detective Sheriff Donovan recommended. My name is Raymond. Can we meet this afternoon? I found something you might want to see." Back at the farm, the girls were running in the yard, laughing as if the world was simple. But the quietest of the three, the one wearing Caroline's necklace, suddenly stopped. She stared fixedly at the hills behind the property. She didn't say anything, just observed. Mrs. Peterson noticed and approached. "Is everything okay, my flower?" The girl pointed her little finger toward the hill. "Man there." She pointed again, but now there was nothing visible, just trees and wind. He was high up. He was watching. Mrs. Peterson felt a chill. She squeezed the girl's hand and led her back inside. "Let's play with the dolls now, okay?" Outside, silence returned to envelop the hill, but the man in the cap was still nearby, circling the perimeter with light steps. He took a folded paper from his pocket and looked at it again. On it was a single handwritten phrase: "Recover the children, eliminate witnesses." The sun was beginning to hide behind the eucalyptus trees when Richard parked his truck in front of a modest house in the San Pedro neighborhood. This was where Raymond, the detective recommended by Donovan, lived. The man was waiting for him on the porch with a black folder in his hands and a serious expression of someone who knew too much but said little. "Come in, Mr. Hargrove. It's better if we talk inside." The house was simple but organized. In the center of the living room stood a table with documents, USB drives, and handwritten notes. Raymond offered coffee, but Richard declined. He wanted answers. "You asked me for information about a black car with tinted windows and no plates, correct?" Raymond asked. "Yes. James saw something like that days before the girls appeared." Raymond turned on an old laptop, connected a USB drive, and opened a security video. "I got these images from a contact at the gas station 7 kilometers from your farm. It's a security camera that nobody knows still works. Watch this." On the screen, a black Vectra appeared at 2:43 in the morning. It pulled over to the shoulder and stayed there for about 3 minutes. Then a figure exited from the back door carrying something in its arms, something small wrapped in blankets. Richard leaned forward, his eyes widening. "It's them." Raymond paused the image. The resolution wasn't good, but it was possible to see 3 bundles being carefully placed on the ground. Then the figure returned to the car, which disappeared into the darkness. The gas station camera doesn't show where they went, but you can see they followed the road that leads to the back entrance of your property. The face of whoever left them was covered with a hood, but the way they moved their arms, it doesn't seem like someone unprepared. This was done calmly, with planning. Richard felt anger rise. He slammed his hand on the table. "And will the police go after this?" Raymond gave a half smile. "They will, but in their own way. That's why you sought me out." He pulled up a second image, a registration form at a simple inn in the neighboring town, made 2 months earlier. A blonde woman without documentation used a false name and stayed for 2 weeks with 3 children, then disappeared. The only clue was a blurry photo taken by the reception camera. Richard froze. The woman in the image, even with her face partially covered, was identical to Caroline. "Raymond, that's my daughter." The detective nodded calmly. "I thought so too. Now comes the more delicate part." He pulled out a printed sheet with the letterhead of a private psychiatric hospital. The name is false, but the description matches. A woman with severe anxiety disorders arrived recently, rescued by a social team in the interior of Goiás. She barely speaks, cries, trembles, but carries a necklace with a butterfly pendant around her neck, just like the girls. Richard jumped up. "Where is she hospitalized?" under judicial protection. Nobody can see her without authorization. Then, get that authorization, I'm going to see my daughter. Raymond closed the folder and looked at him gravely. Consider it done. But Mr. Hargrove, if this woman is indeed your daughter, someone tried to hide this for years. And if they've discovered the girls are with you, they might come back. Night fell with a strong wind that swept across the plantations as if trying to erase the tracks of truth. On the farm, everything seemed calm. Mrs. Peterson was telling stories to the girls in their room while James was patrolling with one of the dogs. But Richard knew deep down that the peace was only apparent. On the porch, he lit a cigarette, a habit he hadn't returned to in years. He looked at the dark road as if something might emerge from it at any moment. His daughter's note and the detective's images still echoed in his head. Caroline alive. Triplets, left at dawn. A car without plates. And now a woman hospitalized under another name with the same necklace. He felt danger approaching like a hungry animal. Out there on the dark hill, the man in the cap was observing once more with his binoculars in hand. He was no longer alone. A second man now accompanied him with a military backpack and a gun attached to his holster. "The old man knows too much," whispered the second one. "It's not time yet. The order is clear. Recover the girls without drawing attention." "And if he doesn't cooperate?" The man in the cap hesitated. "Then the farm goes up in smoke, but only if necessary." The next morning, James found tire marks at the back entrance of the farm where the fence had been discreetly broken. It wasn't the work of an animal. It was people, and people who knew what they were doing. Richard examined the site with attentive eyes. Something with weight scraped here. They got off, or loaded something. He took a photo with his cell phone and sent it directly to Raymond. Minutes later, the phone rang. "The situation's heating up fast, Mr. Hargrove. I discovered the black Vectra belongs to a man named Silas Monteiro, false name, but his face appeared in a federal police report from 2018 linked to human trafficking crimes. The man disappeared since then. Now guess who works as security at the clinic where your daughter is hospitalized?" Richard didn't answer. Raymond himself completed. "Silas Monteiro, now using another name. Cesar, the night shift assistant." Richard felt his blood freeze. "They know she's alive and might be keeping her there by force. It's very possible. The question now is, are you willing to dive into this up to your neck?" "Raymond," he said firmly, "if necessary, I'll go to the depths of hell." Later, while the girls slept, Richard sat beside their bed. He looked at each one carefully, their features, their traits, their eyes. Everything screamed Caroline in his soul. Suddenly, one of the girls woke up, looked at him and whispered, "Mommy said to run if the man with the black belt appeared." "Man, with the black belt?" She nodded her head, frightened. Richard held her hand tightly. "Nobody's going to hurt you, I promise." But inside, he knew the past wasn't just returning. It was coming armed. The following night, the farm slept in silence. The sky was clear, but the air was heavy. Richard paced back and forth in his office with his cell phone glued to his ear, while Raymond spoke from the other end of the line. "I managed to cross-reference the data, Mr. Hargrove. The psychiatric clinic where the woman resembling your daughter is hospitalized receives donations from an NGO that's been investigated for international trafficking, all a facade. They're using health institutions to hide victims, specifically women, mostly with similar profiles. Isolated, without close family, with a history of trauma. Caroline fits the pattern perfectly." Richard wiped his forehead, sweating. "Can you get her out of there?" Raymond took a deep breath. "If we go in with a judicial request, they'll make her disappear. It's what they do. But if we go direct and fast, we might catch them off guard. But it will take courage. Tell me what to do. Tomorrow night, meet me at Rural Highway 21. From there, we'll go to the clinic. But you need to come alone and armed." Richard swallowed hard. He was no longer just a simple farmer trying to understand why 3 girls had appeared in his barn. Now he was a father at the doorstep of a rotten system that kidnapped lives and buried them under false identities. On the farm, the girls began having nightmares. Mrs. Peterson was called twice during the night because one of them screamed in her sleep, "He's going to get us. He's going to get us." The housekeeper did what she could, hugged them, sang softly, but nothing completely calmed them. The three were more agitated than usual, as if they sensed the noose was tightening. The next day, Richard gathered James in the machinery shed. "I'm going out tonight. Don't tell anyone. If I don't return by early morning, take the girls to my sister's house in Oak Ridge. They can't stay alone here. You're getting involved with dangerous people, aren't you, boss? I'm already neck deep. Now I just have to dive in." On the other side of town, in a dark, stuffy office, Silas, the man in the cap, was receiving orders from an encrypted video call. The boss's voice was clear. "The old man is poking where he shouldn't. If he gets close to the clinic, eliminate him. And the girls, get them first. Time's up." Silas hung up, rose from his chair, and pulled a metal case from under the desk. Inside were a syringe, a map of the Hargrove farm, and 3 hospital identification bracelets, all with the same surname, Hargrove. It was almost nightfall when Richard took his truck and left the farm without saying a word. He only left a note locked in his office drawer with clear instructions for James and Mrs. Peterson in case he didn't return. Protect the girls, contact Raymond, and flee to Oak Ridge immediately. The road was empty and the sound of tires cutting through the gravel echoed like an ominous warning. At the agreed point, Raymond was waiting for him, leaning against a silver car with its headlights off. He wore a denim jacket and carried a backpack over his shoulders. Beside him was a black box with electronic equipment and a folder of false documents. "Ready to make some noise?" he asked without beating around the bush. Richard nodded, his eyes firm. "If my daughter's in there, I'm going to get her out, even if I have to do it by force." Raymond opened the folder. "This is the admission record of the patient registered as Marlene Suarez, hospitalized 47 days ago with no external contact. Statements made by a supposed husband who presented false documents. The same man who left her there now works as a night shift security guard." Richard scanned the photo. It was definitely her. Gaunt with a different face, but it was his daughter. "The plan is simple," Raymond explained. "I'll go in as a false health department auditor saying I received complaints about irregularities. You stay in the car with the radio on. If I confirm she's there, I'll send the signal. Then you enter through the back. The generator of the old wing has a side entrance without a sensor. I tested it yesterday. And if anyone tries to stop you, do what a man does to defend what's his." At 9:32 p.m., Raymond entered the clinic. The receptionist, young and bored, didn't even check the fake badge. She pointed to the corridor on the left and said, "Do you want to speak with the technical supervisor? He's on duty." Raymond smiled. "No need, miss. I'm just here to confirm a few things and I'll be on my way." Meanwhile, Richard observed everything through the radio. Minutes later, Raymond's voice came through. Crisp and terse. "Blue code. She's here. Ward 12, last door on the left." Richard got out of the car, grabbed the flashlight, and entered through the back of the clinic. The gate to the old wing was ajar as Raymond had promised. The emergency light blinked weakly. Quick steps, racing heart, hands sweating on the flashlight handle. Upon reaching door 12, he paused. He heard soft crying coming from inside. He turned the handle carefully. It was unlocked. He opened it slowly, and there she was, sitting on the floor, hugging her knees. Thin, pale, but alive. "Caroline?" She raised her eyes slowly. For a moment she looked confused, as if seeing a ghost. "Dad?" she whispered in a hoarse voice. Richard fell to his knees. "My baby girl, I'm here, I've come to get you." But before he could embrace her, a shout echoed from the corridor. "Hey, you! Let go of her!" It was Silas, armed, with fury in his eyes. And in that moment, Richard realized that getting out of there, alive, would not be as simple as getting in. Silas's shout reverberated through the corridors of the abandoned wing like the trigger of a bomb. Richard instinctively turned, positioning himself between Caroline and the armed man. His hands were trembling, but his eyes were fixed. He wasn't going to leave without his daughter. "It's over, Silas," he said firmly. The police already know everything. Drop the gun. Silas smiled crookedly with a sadistic gleam in his eyes. You have no idea who you're messing with, old man. These girls, this woman, they're bargaining chips for you. For us, they're profit. Richard felt his blood boil. You ruined my daughter's life, but I'm going to end this dirty circus you've set up. Silas raised his gun. Caroline screamed, Dad, watch out! Before the shot could occur, a crash cut through the silence. The back door of the clinic was broken down by Raymond, who appeared with a shotgun in his hands and 2 undercover police officers behind him. Gun on the ground now, Raymond shouted. Silas hesitated for a second, tried to run down the side corridor, but one of the officers shot at his leg. The man fell with a hoarse cry, dropping the gun, which ricocheted on the floor. Richard ran to Caroline and hugged her tightly, as if time was reversing to the day when she was just a little girl afraid of thunder. It's all okay now. I'm here. I came to get you. She cried compulsively, unable to speak. Raymond approached. We need to get out of here now. The rest of the gang could be on their way. In the minutes that followed, the operation was concluded with precision. Silas was handcuffed and sedated. The clinic's management tried to argue, but judicial orders arrived on the officers' phones. The facade was exposed. Caroline was taken directly to the city hospital, where she received medical care and special protection. Richard stayed by her side the whole time, not letting go of her hand for even a single minute. On the way back, Raymond explained the developments. The NGO used as a front is already under federal investigation. We've discovered that several women were admitted to psychiatric clinics to be erased from the system. Then their children were taken and sold. The triplets were on the final route, but Caroline managed to escape with them. She didn't get far. She was recaptured and forcibly hospitalized. But why did they leave the girls with me? Raymond responded gravely. Because she convinced someone. One of the employees, maybe a woman, maybe someone who was moved by her plight. She begged for the girls to be left with their grandfather, and someone had compassion. Richard said nothing, just looked out the car window with his face wet with tears. He had his daughter back. His granddaughters were safe, but he knew the war was far from over. It was dawn when Richard's truck crossed the farm gate again. For the first time in many years, he didn't feel the weight of loneliness on his shoulders. Caroline was by his side, wrapped in a blanket, exhausted but alive. Behind them, Raymond drove a second car with 2 police officers, ensuring reinforced protection for the property for an indefinite period. Mrs. Peterson, who hadn't slept a minute, ran when she heard the truck's engine. When she saw Caroline step out staggering, she covered her mouth with her hands, moved. My girl, my God in heaven, she murmured, pulling her into a tender embrace. The triplets, awakened by the noise, came out to the yard with their little eyes squinted from sleep. They stood motionless for a moment, staring at the woman before them as if facing a dream. Then one of them took a step forward. Mommy! Caroline knelt with difficulty, her eyes welling up. My babies, my little butterflies. The 3 ran to her at the same time, and the embrace that formed there in the center of that yard, illuminated only by an old lamppost, needed no explanation. It was pure, genuine. Time had not erased the love, nor had the traumas managed to break that bond. Richard observed in silence. His heart, once calloused by pain and longing, now seemed to beat again with purpose. Later that night, inside the house, Caroline took a hot shower, put on clean clothes, and sat with her father at the kitchen table. She seemed like a different person. Still fragile, yes, but with alive eyes, awakening from a long nightmare. I should have come back sooner, she said, her voice breaking. But I was afraid. They knew everything. They knew where you lived. They knew who the children's mother was. They threatened to commit me as insane if I told anyone anything. And why did you leave the girls in the pig pen? Because it was the only place I knew was still safe. I begged a nurse to help me. We waited for the rain to come to erase our tracks, and then we left them there. I knew you'd find them. Richard held his daughter's hand. And I did. But now no one's taking them from me. Not you either. We're going to handle this together, as a family, Caroline cried silently, her head resting on her father's shoulder. In the living room, the girls slept on top of each other, wrapped in a thick blanket. For the first time in a long time, they slept without fear. Outside, Raymond spoke on the phone at the edge of the plantation. The base has been dismantled, all the documents are with the federal police, but the big bosses are still at large. Silas is just an executor. Do you really think they'll leave this family in peace? The voice on the other end responded coldly. Then protect that farm. From now on, this has become a matter of life or death. The sun was barely threatening to rise on the horizon when Richard was awakened by a subtle noise coming from outside the house. It wasn't the sound of an animal or the wind. It was a metallic rhythmic sound, as if someone was walking slowly across the porch, dragging something on the floor. He sat up with a start, grabbed the old revolver he kept in the dresser drawer, and silently made his way to the door. Outside, the air was still dark and damp. The yard light was no longer working. Someone had broken it during the night. That's when he heard it. Crunch, crunch, footsteps on the gravel. Light, measured. Steps. Richard approached the side window, breath caught in his chest. He looked carefully through the curtain crack and saw a silhouette standing next to the tractor, face covered, with something hanging from his back. He raised his gun, but before he could exit, the door was abruptly opened by Raymond, who was already wearing a bulletproof vest and had a pistol in his hand. Careful, one of the guards is missing. Richard came out right behind him. The silhouette ran towards the back of the farm, and in seconds, the chase began. James also appeared, pulling the guard dog by its leash. It was 20 tense minutes through. The thicket, the closed underbrush, branches cutting their faces, hearts racing. But in the end, they found only footprints. Footprints and a black box purposely left next to the broken gate. Raymond opened it carefully, fearing the worst. Inside were no explosives. There was something even more disturbing. Photos. Images. Of the house, the girls playing in the yard, Caroline on the porch, Richard in the fields. Targets marked with red pen. At the bottom of the box was an envelope. Inside, a single handwritten sheet. You messed with what was quiet. Now everyone will wake up. Later, back at the farmhouse, Richard summoned all his trusted employees. His demeanor was serious, leaving no room for doubt. From today on, everyone who works here will sleep in the main house. The girls and Caroline don't go out alone anymore. Whoever doesn't want to be involved is free to leave now. But whoever stays will have to protect this house with their own life. No one moved. James was the first to speak. I'm staying, boss. Those are your granddaughters, the daughter of the girl I watched grow up. If we have to fall, we fall together. Raymond added, the FBI is already tracking those involved, but until everyone is arrested, this farm needs to function like a bunker. Tomorrow I'll bring 2 more men and arm the perimeter with cameras and sensors. Richard looked at his daughter, who was watching everything with frightened but confident eyes. He knew hell was far from over, but he also knew he was no longer fighting alone. He had a purpose, and that purpose had a name, a surname, and 3 smiles that ran through the house calling him Grandpa. The next day, the farmhouse dawned more silent than usual. The girls woke up early but didn't run to the yard as usual. They seemed to understand, even at such a young age, that something had changed in the air. Mrs. Peterson was preparing breakfast when Caroline entered the kitchen with a paper in her hand. It was one of the hospital bracelets left in the mysterious box during the night. I recognize this, she said, handing the bracelet to Richard. They used these on them when we were still in Palmas before being taken to Goiás. Richard examined the bracelet. It had a code and a printed name. Leticia Montero. Leticia? But none of them is named Leticia. Caroline took a deep breath. They changed the names on the documentation, in the records, in everything. Each one received a different name. That's how they erased our identity. They became Leticia, Melissa, and Tina, but their real names. She paused, emotional. Their real names are Clara, Elisa, and Marina. I chose those names when I discovered they were triplets. Each has a meaning. Clara means light, Elisa means promise, and Marina because my mother's name was Maria, and I wanted to honor her. Richard squeezed his daughter's hands. Then let's give them back their right names. Let's erase everything these criminals tried to build. Meanwhile, Raymond was in Oak Ridge at the Federal Police Building, presenting evidence to the agent in charge of the case. The box with the photos, the clinic videos, the false records. Everything was beginning to piece together the puzzle of an international human trafficking network. And the names of those involved? Asked the agent. Raymond pulled a dossier from inside the folder. Here are the three main ones: a doctor with a fake license, a former employee of the juvenile court, and this one, he pointed to a photo, is the principal operator. False name: Antonio Castro, but his real name is Andrew Collins. He's been a fugitive in Paraguay, has contacts with politicians and businessmen. The mastermind behind it all. The agent crossed her arms. And where is he now? Raymond looked at her gravely. That's the worst part. His latest movements indicate he's here in the U.S., and he probably already knows we've lost control over the girls. Back at the farm, Richard sat with his granddaughters in the yard, and with the help of drawings, explained to each one their real name. You're Clara, see? He said, touching the cheek of the most cheerful one. And you're Elisa, he said to the quietest one. And you, my little one, he said to the one wearing the necklace. You're Marina, like your grandmother. The three smiled, and for the first time they repeated the names with clarity. Clara, Elisa, Marina. Names that had been erased but now shone like beacons in the midst of darkness. It was late afternoon, when the rural mail truck appeared at the farm gate. Nothing unusual except for the fact that in recent years nobody had sent letters to Richard Hargrove. The mailman, a young man with rapid speech, delivered just a plain brown envelope with no stamp and no return address. On the front, only the name handwritten, Mr. Richard Hargrove, urgent. Suspicious, Richard waited for the young man to leave before opening it. He went to his office, locked the door, sat at his desk, and carefully opened the seal. Inside were two folded sheets. One was a letter, the other a copy of a birth certificate. The letter was direct. If you're reading this, it's because you already know more than you should, but you still don't know everything. Caroline wasn't the only one. They were the first test. 3 girls with rare genetic potential. The attempt was to sell them abroad for luxury adoption, but Caroline escaped. The man who commands all this is called Andrew Collins, but he uses different names in each state. He already knows you have the children. Protect them. They don't back down easily. Richard was paralyzed. The attached certificate bore the name of a baby, Anna Clara Alves Hargrove. The date of birth was identical to that of the triplets, but there was something strange. The certificate was issued in another state with another mother declared. It was further proof that the group was falsifying records to hide the real children. And now someone was on their side, or perhaps among them, someone from inside, leaking information. Chapter 11, Gathering Forces. Meanwhile, Raymond was back at the farm, organizing new security measures. They had already installed motion sensors at the blind spots of the property and replaced the broken lamppost with photocell reflectors. What do you have there? He asked, seeing Richard with the letter in his hands. The missing piece to confirm everything. They didn't just want to make the girls disappear, they were part of something bigger, a test, as if they were guinea pigs in a much broader plan. Raymond took the certificate and analyzed it. They create multiple false identities. If they sell a child, the real one disappears and the fake one takes her place. It's trafficking of lives with the appearance of legality. Richard closed his eyes for a moment, trying to contain his anger. They're playing God with entire families, and they're not alone. This requires corrupted registry offices, complicit, social workers, disguised clinics. The network is enormous. That night at dinner with the family gathered, Caroline seemed calmer. The girls were cheerful, eating rice pudding and showing drawings they had made with Mrs. Peterson. But Richard was restless. When everyone was asleep, He returned to the porch with the letter in hand. He sat in the wooden chair, lit a cigarette, and looked at the starry sky. There, in the midst of the warm night breeze, he made a silent vow. As long as I breathe, no one will touch my granddaughters. And if this Andrew Collins comes, he'll have to go through me first. 2 days passed, in relative calm. The girls were beginning to adapt to the new routine, sleeping better and calling Richard Grandpa naturally. Caroline, in turn, was starting to smile again. Not always, but enough for Mrs. Peterson to say emotionally, "It seems like the light of the house has turned on again." But all light attracts shadows. On Wednesday morning, a silver pickup with Washington, D.C. plates parked outside the gate. The driver got out slowly. He was a man in a suit with dark glasses and a leather briefcase under his arm. He had a smooth tone but a firm posture. He said to the ranch hand at the entrance, My name is Mark Taylor. I'm a lawyer. I'd like to speak with Mr. Richard Hargrove. It's about the custody of the children." The information quickly reached Richard, who was observing from the porch with Raymond by his side. "Do you know him?" asked the detective. "Never seen him, but the name doesn't sound right." Raymond took the binoculars and focused on the man's face. "Something's wrong here. Look at the way he observes everything. He's mapping the terrain. That's not a lawyer. That's a disguised agent or worse, an enforcer." "Let's talk to him," said Richard, "but not here." Minutes later, the two went to meet the supposed lawyer who was waiting, leaning against his pickup with a rehearsed smile. "Good morning, gentlemen. I've come on behalf of the Dignified Life Foundation. We received a complaint that 3 minors are being kept here without official registration. I'm here to request documents and ensure everything is within the law." Raymond crossed his arms, staring at the man. How strange. This foundation isn't registered with the Bar Association, and Mr. Taylor is using a badge with a registration number belonging to another lawyer from Virginia. The man maintained his smile, but his eyes changed. "This is a misunderstanding. Perhaps there's been a mix-up of documents." "Better leave now," Richard said firmly. "And tell your boss he chose the wrong target." For a moment, the false lawyer's mask fell. He pressed his lips, turned on his heels, and went back to the car. As he slammed the door before starting the engine, he said, "You don't know who you're dealing with. This doesn't end here." The pickup disappeared on the dirt road, raising dust. Later, Raymond searched the records of the car's plate and confirmed what he suspected: a cloned vehicle. The visit wasn't just a disguised threat. It was a measuring of territory, a warning. They knew where they were, who was involved, and what remained to be taken. Richard gathered the farm team again at nightfall. "From today on, no one else enters. Here without double identification, and the back entrance will be sealed. Anyone who comes without notice doesn't get in, even if they bring an angel-riding shotgun." Raymond added, "They're trying to create a legal reason to take the girls. Stay alert. Any strange movement, let me know, even if it's just a different butterfly at the gate." Mrs. Peterson held Caroline's hand tightly. "We won't let anyone touch these girls, neither by the justice of men nor by the justice of monsters." And so it was that night that the Hargrove farm ceased to be just a home and officially became a fortress. The following night fell hot and airless, as if the very air was holding its breath. The farm remained guarded 24 hours by 2 men hired by Raymond, equipped with short-range radios and night vision. Inside the house, Richard was trying to sleep when the landline phone rang. The number on the display was unknown. Instinctively, he answered in silence. "Good evening, Mr. Hargrove," said a deep, slow male voice. "I hope you're enjoying your last moments of peace." Richard remained silent, squeezing the phone with force. "Don't be mistaken, this isn't a negotiation, it's a reminder. Caroline was warned years ago not to escape. The girls are technically still ours. You're committing a federal crime by keeping them there." Richard responded coldly, "The crime is selling children like cattle, and now you've messed with the wrong man." The voice chuckled softly on the other end of the line. "You think you're the first angry father we've faced? All the others are dead or broken. You know what the difference is? You're old, and old men don't run so fast. The call dropped. Richard stood still, breathing deeply, his heart pounding in his chest like a hammer on a board. Then he called Raymond. "We need to track a call right now." Raymond responded from the other end, already putting on his coat. "I'm on my way." Nobody calls in that tone unless they want to provoke. They're nervous. That's good, but it's also when they become more dangerous. The next morning, Raymond went to the local operator's headquarters and got a log of the call. The number was from a prepaid chip activated less than 48 hours earlier. The signal tower pointed to a specific location, a simple hotel in the town of Three Rivers. "If you want, I can go there right now," said Raymond. "No, we'll go together," Richard replied. "But without weapons. If he's there, I want to look that scoundrel in the eyes." While they prepared for the trip, James organized the farm's surveillance routes, training the ranch hands for rotations and strategic observation points. Mrs. Peterson kept the girls occupied with games inside the house, but it wasn't easy. Clara, the most sensitive of the three, had started wetting the bed again, a clear sign she felt the tense environment. Caroline, sitting with her daughter in her lap, looked out the window, feeling deep in her soul that the enemy wasn't just observing from a distance. He had already begun to surround them on all sides, and this time he might not come with threats. He might come with blood. The journey to Three Rivers was silent. Richard drove with his eyes fixed on the dirt road that cut through the plantations until it reached the asphalt. Raymond, in the passenger seat, handled his cell phone with a cryptographic antenna, tracking the latest updates on the number used in the previous night's call. According to the tower system, the signal was registered for a longer time near a hotel called Desert Sun. It's simple, cheap, discreet, ideal for someone who doesn't want to be noticed. "So that's where he is?" Richard asked, tightening his grip on the steering wheel. Or was. The history shows the last activity was at 6:14 in the morning, and the phone was turned off minutes later. They arrived in town shortly after 9 o'clock. The hotel was discreet, with a beige facade, old signs, and a bored receptionist behind the counter. Raymond showed a fake civil police badge and asked, "Did any guests check in yesterday using the name Mark Taylor?" The young woman consulted the registration book. "Yes, room 208, but he left early today. Left the key here and was gone. Didn't even have breakfast." Raymond raised an eyebrow. "Did he leave any objects? Receive visitors? Did he come alone?" He just asked for privacy. Without wasting time, they went up to the second floor. Room 208 was locked, but Raymond had a pick lock specifically for infiltrations. In seconds, they were inside. Everything seemed clean, bed made, nothing forgotten, at first glance. But Richard, with the eye of an experienced farmer, noticed the detail. In the corner of the desk, a round mark on the glass indicated that someone had left a metal cup there. And there was something else, a cigarette butt in the ashtray of the same brand he used. Raymond took out a portable UV flashlight and passed it over the wall next to the bed. A fluorescent trace appeared, indicating something had been stuck there. He brought information, stuck it on the wall, and then removed it. Probably to memorize faces, routes, schedules he was preparing. Richard approached the window. "And now he's loose out there, perhaps returning to my farm while we're here." Raymond picked up his phone and called James. "Confirm security there. Reinforce the perimeter. If anything strange happens, take the girls immediately out of the main house into the secure shed. The priority is the children." James responded from the other end with a firm voice. "Everything's calm here, but we'll double the attention." Before leaving the room, Raymond looked at the security camera in the corridor. "We're going to need that footage. I want to see his face as he left here if he's not wearing a cap or mask." "Even if he is," replied Richard, "the way he walks, the time he stays, everything speaks. And I'm going to find out who the bastard is who dared to threaten my granddaughter while looking me in the eyes." Back at the farm, while the security guards were on patrol, Caroline paced back and forth on the porch. She sensed something wrong, and at that moment her intuition wasn't failing her. Just a few meters away, in the middle of the brush, a silent drone was flying over the property, recording images in real time and sending them directly to the laptop. of a man hidden in a car parked 3 kilometers away. He observed the images and murmured, "It's here all right, all 3 are here. Time to send the final message." The drone hovered in the sky like a metallic bird, almost imperceptible, slowly flying over the main house, capturing specific angles. The garden where Clara, Elisa, and Marina played under Mrs. Peterson's supervision, the porch where Caroline anxiously walked, and the back of the property where armed security guards circulated. Inside a black SUV parked 3 kilometers from the farm, the cold-eyed man watched everything in real time on a 14-inch screen. He didn't talk much, just observed like someone drawing, the blueprint for an invasion. Beside him was a case with cables, sensors, and something wrapped in red fabric. He picked up his cell phone and sent a single message. Position confirmed. 3 targets, beginning phase 2. The warning will be delivered today. Meanwhile, Richard and Raymond were returning from 3 Rivers on the dirt road. The truck's tires cut through the dust with urgency, but the atmosphere inside the vehicle was tense. Raymond had gained partial access to the hotel cameras and was reviewing the footage on a tablet. Here he is at 6:13 wearing a cap and surgical mask. Walks like a military man, erect posture, precise steps. This guy has training. Richard watched in silence. He left before we arrived. He's always 1 step ahead. But now we know his face. If we cross it with the clinic images and the Goiás hospital, we'll find something. We just need time. Time is what we don't have, Raymond. These guys aren't bluffing. Back at the farm, the sunset tinged everything golden. James was patrolling the external area when he heard a sharp buzzing in the sky. He looked up in time to see a glint disappearing behind the shed. What was that? A drone? He ran to the location, followed by one of the security guards. They searched the brush but didn't find the device. Only a package carefully left on a wooden box. It was the size of a loaf of bread, wrapped in dark red fabric tied with string. James hesitated, then put on gloves and opened the package carefully. Inside was a cloth doll with 3 faces sewn side by side, clearly representing the triplets. The eyes were made with red buttons and the mouth with black thread braided in the shape of an X. On the doll's chest, a note pinned with a safety pin. "You took them from me. Now I'll take your piece." James felt a chill. He immediately called the security guards and alerted Caroline. When Richard arrived minutes later, there was already a perimeter formed around the shed. "It was a warning," said Raymond, examining the doll with gloves. "These symbols are used by groups that operate with international kidnapping and concealment. This isn't superstition, it's territorial marking, a signature." Richard took the note with contained anger. "Then it's war now." "We need to think like they think," said Raymond, "and that starts now. I want a complete map of the farm, the old tunnels, cattle passages, any escape route. We're going to use this land to our advantage." "And the girls?" "The girls," said Raymond, looking at the little ones on the porch, "are what they want. But now they're going to learn that nobody messes with Hargrove blood with impunity." Meanwhile, the black SUV was slowly moving away on the rural road. Inside, the drone operator smiled unhurriedly as he typed another message. "Message delivered. Now let's see what this old man is made of." With the cloth doll still in his hands, Richard walked straight to the old storage behind the stable. Decades ago, his father had built a maze of underground tunnels used to store grain and escape floods. Since then, everything had been bricked up, but he knew it could now serve as a shelter or trap. The war has come, Raymond. Let's turn this land into a field of defense. In the following days, trusted men reopened the tunnel entrances. Some were flooded, others obstructed, but 3 of them still connected the main house to the old shed, the back garden, and the riverbank. Thermal cameras and motion sensors were installed at strategic points. Meanwhile, the girls were being quietly trained. Caroline taught each one how to identify danger, where to hide, how to head for the safe tunnel if something happened. "This is just a game," she said, trying to hide her fear. A game of hiding and protecting. That night, while everyone slept, a sensor triggered. Raymond checked the monitor. Movement detected at the west fence. Richard loaded his shotgun, looked out the window and whispered, "They've returned." The movement recorded by the sensors wasn't an animal. The cameras showed 3 hooded silhouettes crossing the west fence with military command precision. They weren't carrying flashlights but using night vision goggles. Richard and Raymond followed everything from the monitor installed in the office. James, with 2 armed ranch hands, positioned himself in the shed, ready for any attack. Carolyn silently guided the girls to the tunnel under the house where mattresses and supplies were already prepared. "If something happens," she told her eldest daughter, "you take your sisters through this door." Clara nodded with a serious gleam in her eye. The invaders split up. One went to the water tank and cut the main pipe. Another headed to the pen, where he left a package attached under the animal's drinking trough. The third walked toward the main house. Before he could reach the porch, a dry explosion cut through the silence. Raymond fired. The invader fell to his knees, screaming in pain as the others fled through the cornfield. Richard approached with his gun drawn. "Who sent you?" The man laughed, spitting blood. "We're already inside, you just haven't realized it yet." While the captured invader was being immobilized by Raymond and the security guards, Richard examined the package left in the pen. Inside wasn't an explosive but a hidden camera in fake feed that transmitted everything via satellite. "They were filming us from the inside out," said Raymond. James informed them by radio that one of the recently hired workers had disappeared minutes before the attack. The assistant caretaker hired less than 10 days ago. False name, forged documents, a plant. "They knew about the tunnel, knew the routine, knew everything," concluded Richard, tightening his jaw. The wounded man, still breathing, uttered a phrase as he was being taken to the truck. "You messed with the wrong chain. What comes next has no turning back." Caroline, listening from afar, held Marina in her arms and looked at the dark sky. "If they think they'll destroy us with fear, let them come with everything they've got. In the Hargrove farm, fear has already turned to fury.